to hello, welcome to the things that women swallow, part 3, March 18th, 2018, Sunday, a sunny day for women to be talking about the things we swallow. And I've got a bevy of like intellectual beasts on this panel, intellectual, spiritual, and just, you know, they'll get you righted beasts on this panel. So I'm going to hand over to them because they're absolutely wonderful and they can speak to who they are. So first panelist, Andrea Thompson. Tell us who you are and why you're here today.
My name is Andrea Thompson, and I have been practicing and studying shamanic arts and earth-based healing for about the past 15 years. And I'm here today because I thought that the topic was timely. I think the topic is something that we definitely need to discuss. And we also need to discuss how do we get to the next step and not just stay in a mode of discussion. And so I'm really interested to hear what everyone has to say, but also to contribute things that I've swallowed or things that women before me have swallowed that I don't have to swallow. Amazing. So that's why I'm here today.
Thank you. Over to Evelyn, who's in our far-flung lands. Please tell us where you are, who you are, what you do.
Yeah, hi, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I think I'm covering them all. My name is Evelyn Bando, and I call myself a wisdom writer and a spiritual coach and intuitive and a spirit medium. So essentially my work in the world is helping people to remember who they are. My first work is to remember who I am, and then my calling is to help other people do the same. And I probably have been doing some type of spirit work without even realizing it since I was a kid. But I really came onto my path at 23. And then at some point, spirit was like, your career is no more. You need to start doing your spiritual work and you can't run from this. And I am currently in northern Thailand, Chiang Mai, Thailand. Convalescing, getting myself in order and preparing myself for the next phase of what my work is going to be. Plus, I had to run away from America because it was too much. And I'm excited for this conversation because I look at, you know, from the generational pattern breaker perspective, how a lot of us are cleaning up the things that our foremothers swallowed. So we may not have swallowed, we have not done the swallowing, but we are getting the impacts of it. So what does it look like to, you know, not ingest the poison anymore or to eliminate it out? And yeah, looking forward to the conversation and where it goes.
Thank you. Thank you. And hello to Thailand. That's amazing. Yes. Over to Jess. I think your mic might be off, but Jess, can you hear us?
Absolutely. I just muted it so that you wouldn't have to hear the wind blowing in the trees. So I'm Jessica Horn, and I'm a feminist activist. I work in women's rights formally, but I'm a feminist activist forever. And I work in resourcing, so ensuring that the amazing activist work that we do in real life, not just on Twitter, gets resourced and financed, that sisters have, you know, institutions to sustain and, you know, places to go when they need shelter and action on the laws and policies that shape our lives. So, I mean, I guess I'm part of an African feminist movement that's about spitting out, or in fact, encouraging all of us not to swallow in the first place if the things are really bad for you. And so I'm interested in this conversation because this is exactly how we're intervening, you know, is to really encourage us to not accept the things that destroy us or limit us or inhibit us. And so I think there's very, very critical conversations that we have to keep having because, of course, we live in systems of power that are telling us that we need to put up with all manner of abuses. And so if we don't sustain the conversation around why we shouldn't, it's easy to slip back into accepting those practices. So I'm very excited for this.
We are excited to have you. We're excited to have all of you. You guys are bloody brilliant in my most London slang that I can give you. But thank you so much for joining. So without further ado, let's launch into the things that women swallow. So, you know, this is the third part and it really is for Women's History Month. So next week is the last week. And I just, you know, I've been thinking a lot about the things that I do to make myself more palatable to the world, and even in some regards more palatable to myself. And, you know, Andrea, you mentioned something before, the things that our foremothers swallowed, or was it Evelyn, sorry, that maybe we don't swallow. And I'm really interested in that. What do you think some of those things are? And what do you think we now are having a choice in saying, nah, you know, what would you say?
Yeah. So if I think about my own mom, her sisters, and just other Black women across the diaspora who are in that, what will you call it, that baby boomer generation, I think a lot of them swallowed their hopes, dreams, ambitions, and desires. I think those of us who had moms who were progressive were very fortunate in that we saw that, right? A lot of our moms, I'll speak for my mom, she went from living her life to having to conform to societal norms to get married and have kids. And I was her second child after the first marriage, she's coming from living a high life in London or whatever to all of a sudden her sister's like, you need to get married, you need to have a baby, what are you doing? And so here I come. And I feel like if my mother had had the choice, if I wasn't there, she probably would not have stayed with my dad. And so I got a lot of her projected frustration. And fast forward, I worked in community development for like 18 years, and a lot of times work in homeless shelters, work with communities of Black people who were systematically impoverished, and looked at the dynamics and worked with moms who had their children, and seeing moms trying to hold it together and not take it out on their kids, but end up taking it out on their kids because they're so frustrated in this round and round cycle of trauma that happens. So a lot of times our mothers, they swallowed their inability for choice. They swallowed cultural expectations. And with a lot of the women I work with, I'm always saying we are the generational pattern breakers. We are, and if you're coming from a country that was colonized, that dealt, or if you are a descendant of an enslaved African in America, whatever, we are the first generation, really, us Zennials, and particularly the millennials and the Z babies or whatever, who have the ability to take ownership of our own spiritual development, which is why it feels so messy and so uncomfortable. We are the first generation, where primarily we can ask the questions of what is my purpose and what is my calling in life and how do I go get that? We are some of the first generation of women, of Black women who say, you know what, I don't want to live here. I don't necessarily want to get married, or I'm not marrying anyone who's beneath my station because I deserve better. Let me go see the world, or let me go contribute. Let me go run an organization. Let me go be a CEO. So in a lot of ways, we are transmuting what a lot of our foremothers swallowed. But what comes with that then is, how do you start to make yourself more palatable, particularly when you're in a Western consciousness and a Western conditioning? So I'm always exploring that tension in that nuance.
Yeah.
You know?
And I hear you about that tension because, you know, I live with myself in a way that I decolonize my mind. So that means that I'm not making choices out of white supremacy ideas, right? One of the biggest choices I make and what we can see behind me is that I make sure that any kind of imagery in my apartment has to look like me. It has to reflect me. That's a very, very definite thing I do, and it's something I'm going to continue to do. When I have my family, they will only see images of themselves as well. Being in the PR industry, I know how much imagery is powerful. So we make these choices, but I do understand that there's a whole other framework that I haven't really tackled yet, really, in my personal life so much, which is patriarchy and how I view myself. And so I guess over to you, Andrea, and just leading on from what Evelyn was saying. So it's this tension, right? It's this tension that we're the generation that can do what we want, in the, you know, inverted commas. But what do you do with that once you have it, especially when the whole world isn't doing that? How does that feel, and what does that look like?
Well, it's very interesting because about maybe 10 years ago, I started having a series of conversations with my then in her 70s, although now she's in her 80s, my grandmother. And we talked a lot about what things that I have access to that she didn't have access to, like, you know, reproductive rights and career rights and owning a home and, you know, being able to travel. And one of the things that I found is that even though our adulthoods are you know, spaced out over 50 years. In some ways, even though I can do all of this and I do have that choice, there are still people who will look and say, oh, so when are you going to settle down and have kids? Because my value as who I am in the community at times is just attached to, you know, do you have a family? Have you reproduced? And are you married? And so for me, having those conversations openly with her was really helpful. And it made me understand that she does understand what she took so that I have choice. And she still is sort of encouraging me to still move forward. And so what I do with that tension is I just let that tension stay there. I don't give into it. I acknowledge it and I understand that it's there, but I don't let it control me. And one of the words that Evelyn used, transmute, I think is so powerful. I did a meditation this morning before, and one of the messages was, we have to transmute the poison, because it's kind of what you said. Some of the poison can be helpful, but we have to learn, some of it we'll have to ingest and some of it we can spit out, as Jess said, but what we intake, we have the power to transmute.
That's actually quite a magical way of thinking about it. I'm just thinking in a sort of Black Panther kind of way. That's kind of, I don't know, it's taking me into Afrofuture, you know, and Afrofuture is kind
or
of
Afro past.
So, right, exactly.
Because one of the things that really bothers me is this whole idea of New Age. What we're practicing is not new. This is old. This is how we survived. This is how we built civilizations. This is how we traveled around the world, and not necessarily colonized people, but we did all that. And it is through that magic. It's not imperialism that takes you. So it is Afrofuture, but it's also Afro-past.
I love that. So Jess, over to you, because like you're on the front line, really. You're on the front line in developing countries, namely giving women rights or at least giving them access to rights, or in giving skills exchange and things like that, with things that maybe we in the West have quite readily or understand quite readily. So from your viewpoint, from that kind of place, what do you think about this conversation? And really, are we even scratching the surface? Because I want a global aspect. We're sitting here saying, oh, hey, ha, ha, ha. But what is really going on globally with Black women? What do we need?
I mean, the thing is that listening to the other sisters, the struggles are the same. I mean, the thing is, we're all sitting in systems of power that are interrelated and they are global. And so what happens is just in different regions, they maybe manifest more severely, but it's the same problems. So for example, in the African context, the majority of Africans are economically marginalized in this global economic system. But that's the same for the majority of Black people in the United States, for example. Right. And it's actually the same actors creating that marginalization. So, and the patriarchy is also the same. And I think, you know, there's something about African descendant African communities that have similar discourses around community, and in a way similar discourses around gender, which are very problematic. And I think a lot of it was produced in moments of crisis. So there's this now obsession with cohesion and keeping things together. And it's as if it's women's obligation to do so. And so, you know, all of this discussion about, oh, but you know, you can be a woman, but really to be a woman means to have children. Really to be a woman means to have a family, to keep a Black man or an African man or what have you, to cook. All of these discourses are really what we're still battling, and it's just such a drag. The other, for International Women's Day, the African Women's Development Fund and Pepperdam Ministries, which is a really feisty online Ghanaian feminist platform that started on Facebook, organized this talk, which is basically like a retrospective of Ghanaian feminist activism from kind of like I guess to be like our parents' generation till the 20-somethings now. And what was so interesting is that the women who were like post-independence activists, you know, spoke a lot about the work they were doing fighting the military, dictatorship, and all this kind of real structural transformation. And the youngest feminists were speaking a lot about this fight around whether or not women should cook. And the older feminists were saying, I cannot believe that after all we've done, we're back to the question of should women cook? And so, you know, it's this interesting kind of constant re-entrenchment of this narrative of so-called community and so-called culture, and often reinforced by, colonized religion, which reinforces all of these ideas about who we can be in this incredibly constrained way. So, I think that the swallowing is partly we're being force swallowed, like a lot of it is, it's really power structures that force us to do this. And there's so much social convention around it that it's really hard to break it. So you can be a renegade. People have always been renegades. You can always challenge. You can always live as an outlaw, but it means living as an outlaw. And so I think the thing is, what we're trying to do is to enlarge the space so that so-called outlaws are actually understood to be part of our community too.
Right.
And so that it's like, actually, there are this definition of Africanness, because people always resort to a very broad argument, they don't say my particular ethnic group or something. All of a sudden, we're all Africans and African women do this. Similarly, in the States, it's Black women do that, even though there's such tremendous diversity in who Black women are, what they do. One of our resistances is to say, yeah, Black women are expansive, right? Expansive. We're not going to swallow this idea of one narrative of one way of being, because it's never been true. I like the idea of Afro-past and of sort of like going back through the traditions of survival and kind of traditions of knowing. That's very difficult to do in contemporary Africa. Some contexts are easier than others, but I don't know if we really embrace or realize the impact of colonial Christianity in its rebirth in Pentecostalism, because, it explicitly speaks about the need to exercise these very ancestral ways of knowing that you two are tapping into, you see? It's explicit to the point that it's even telling people that they have to reject the African names that speak to the presence of ancestors. So there's this re-erasure.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that, because
that break
exactly
ancestors are deadly.
But so that's also another thing that's being swallowed with with great kind of fervor. I mean, and I think it's problematic because, again, it's a very narrow discourse. It's very homogenizing. I mean, we would call it fundamentalist in the theological sense if it's about fundamentals of the faith and this incredibly restricted notion about what theology is and what a relationship to the divine is and what possible interpretations are. And what I'm finding in many contexts that we're organizing is that that's actually one of the biggest barriers, So it's like this un-African and un-Christian narrative around women choosing to do things other than an incredibly narrow conventional sense of what women are expected to do. And again, it just takes a lot of courage, So I think it's beautiful that the sisters are having these generational conversations with their grandmothers and mothers. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And I think we have to just keep having these kinds of conversations to enlarge how many people are talking in this way, how many people are hearing it, and to make people feel like, again, you're not an outlaw, you're part of the community.
Yeah.
And being different is a beautiful thing. And our power is in our diversity and in our ability to see at multiple levels and in multiple ways. And that's actually our resilience, and that's our survival.
I really love everything that you've said, and it so beautifully weaves into what Evelyn and Andrea said before. I'm really glad that spirituality and our sort of traditions, African traditions, and I'd say African as an African and whoever you are in the diaspora, African, so to include everybody. And the fact that this mental break and spiritual break that was forced on us has led us to kind of subscribe into these systems that are killing us. And also that we don't know anymore, and we're actually the most knowing. So I don't know how you guys feel about women, the feminine divine, and really how we can kind of exalt it again. Can we exalt it again? Is it necessary? Because I mean, we see movements like Me Too and Time's Up, and they don't feel comfortable to me. It doesn't feel like it's not my truth, you know what I mean? Because it feels like it's another capitalist expression of what feminism and women's experiences should be, rather than it really going to the gut of what we need. So I don't know what you guys think about what's happening currently with women, our voices, our experiences, and whether we're even on the right track.
I'll start. So I'll say that any progress is good progress to a point. And what is really important is that for those who are called to do the healing work, to really step up and to create the spaces, knowing that there is going to be a bit of sacrifice in that. right? Because when you are speaking, so I put on my little thing, slayer of spiritual lies, right? Because, so for me, I've been an entrepreneur for like 10 years at this point, and I've been heavily in the online world, the spiritual development world. I'm a certified professional coach, all this other type of stuff, in addition to being a child of Africans and having a whole bunch of degrees, because all we do is go to school, right? Right. So, you know, you get to the West and it's like, go to school. But a lot of where this stuff would fall in the States, particularly the West, personal development, spiritual development, the narrative of the divine feminine, the narrative of goddess is very much white woman, white this, white aesthetic, whiteness. And I actually, a few years ago, had a very big falling out with this whole concept of new age spirituality and everything. I just think it's a big lie. But this concept of, yet again, here is spirituality being colonized. Here are indigenous traditions being colonized to the point where it's ridiculous, to the point that anyone who would, a Black woman or a woman of African descent, would do a search around goddess imagery or divine feminine, would think that, oh, this is not for me. I see no representation in this. And that is changing. Even when we talk about things like witchcraft, right? Which is really about being a wise woman, people who knew herbs, people who knew how to heal, people who knew how to do all of this stuff. These are our ancestral ways to a point. This is what allowed us to be connected to the land, and I'm stamping my foot. And so this is a level of soul disconnection that exists, that no matter how many self-care people try to do, when you have pieces of your soul that are literally not attached to anything because your belief system is one that keeps you separate from your divinity, it is really challenging to heal. So to the extent that these movements are creating openings where people are starting to ask questions, yes. To the extent that people like myself and Andrea and Jessica and however we all show up, start having these conversations like, you know what, there's more to be seen. There's more beyond the veil. What questions do you have? Things like that. It's to the extent that we're going to bring people into the truth, their version of the truth. And more, particularly our generation and younger women, are questioning teachings of organized religion, no matter what the spectrum is, are questioning, you know, what is their concept of God and the goddess and God is? What does ancestral veneration mean? Mm-hmm. And how does it look and how do I start to do it? So for me, I don't dissuade people. Like some people start, if I want to do a spell to bind a man to me. And I'm like, yeah, no, that we're not binding. Why? Don't bind anybody to you. You know, there's a whole level of wisdom and teaching that needs to happen. But and I think this is also where the struggle is, because these traditions usually were passed down by the wise women across all racial groups, all ethnicities. Unfortunately, you know, society killed a lot of the wise women, right?
Got placed in Coventry where they sent them,
right. So now we're in a beautiful space, and the internet kind of helps. But to really answer your question, I think we're creating openings, and those of us who have been called to do the work, to be the wise women, to be the vessels for healing, so to speak, we have to step up in however way we can step up and communicate and speak to whoever we can communicate and speak to. My mother's side of the family, they are all hard Bible thumping Methodists. Hard, like my poor granny passed away, and they got WhatsApp groups for days, and I'm just like, I want to walk away from this WhatsApp group because if they quote one more white Jesus, ma'am, I don't know. And I'm just like, God, no. There's a part of me that's like, I just come in and drop my little things, plant my little seeds, and go on about my business, because none of us are responsible for making people change their minds, because the worst thing you can do to an adult is rip their belief system from underneath them. But what you can do if you are skilled is drop the seeds of questioning so that their own soul can start to bubble up and ask the questions about, well, what's true for me? What's real for me? I'm really predicting about 2 to 3 years, you're going to have a lot of people having an existential crisis because they're going to be challenging. What do I believe? I'll be quiet now.
So, Jess, as you said, colonialism and what it's done to Africa, and having the space to even practice your own traditions, your indigenous traditions, birthrights, and things like that. Where does the feminine come into that? How can we regain control?
I mean, in the spiritual context, it's a hard one to answer because, I mean, I think what Evelyn's saying is also true that, people have their belief systems and it's kind of what they're believing now. A lot of me doesn't like I ask questions, but I don't intervene a lot in that space just because I just feel like at the end of the day, anyway, it's energy draining. But also, I mean, what are you going to do? So you just look and see where you can build from what is there. There are certainly a lot of people who just, because they don't feel like there's an alternative space, they just basically walk away in general from organized religion, but they're still searching and they can't quite find something. I think what's been interesting is the kind of globalization of Yoruba belief systems. And I mean, it's interesting, but I think it's also problematic, because actually everybody has their own systems. So like in as much as these are archetypes, they're kind of the Orisha archetypes. They speak to kind of like the common archetypes of any spiritual tradition, really. So I think that's useful. But also everybody has theirs. Like for example, my mother's father, so my grandfather, came from the peaks of the Rwenzori Mountains, okay, in Western Uganda. And they have ancestral snow gods. Snow gods.
I love that.
On the equator. Because it's so high up that there's actually glaciers and there's like snow-capped peaks. So for me, there's just some of these things that I'm like, we don't really, like I said, for me, I'm about expansiveness. I'm really about like expansiveness. And, the other thing is, of course, ideas have always traveled, right? Africans are cosmopolitan. Exactly. So like we've always been on the move. We have always been all over and bringing back things, ideas. And we travel. And some ethnic groups in particular travel a lot more than others. But we've always traveled. We've always been around, prior to colonization, everything, we're always around, And so, I mean, there's also a mesclage. There's always a mixing of things. But yeah, I just feel like there's also that thing of my appeal, if people wanted to go on that journey, is actually to find about their own direct lineage, so like what happens in your family, wherever you're from. Because the other thing is that interestingly, in most Bantu religion, you inherit your healing power. And that also, it's true that the wise women were killed, but you see, the dead don't die.
Exactly, energy never dies. I was going to say that.
And so what happens is you actually inherit that spirit, even if whether you want it or not. So oftentimes it comes to you in dreams or whatever, and it still comes to you. And so I think that's also interesting to consider, that maybe a lot of people who are kind of fervently into organized religion are actually there because they're trying to have a spiritual connection, and it's just the language available. But I mean, and there's also like in Ghana, for example, there's this brilliant movement of like humanists and like secular atheists. I'm rooting for them, man. I'm like, why not? You know what I mean? You also have a right,
right?
It's got to be like, it's like the deepest heresy, in this culture, to not believe in any kind of God. It's just the deepest heresy, and I'm like, do you, man? Like, why not? I mean,
feel uncomfortable, disrupt.
So I think it's great to keep expanding and talking about it, and like I said, encouraging also the people to go on this journey of trying to find out specifically from their own lineage. What did you have? Who were the archetypes and what were the stories? What was the practice? Because sometimes what you'll see then is there's echoes of it in the things your family do now, that actually came from there, but they don't want to say that's what it is. How did you worship? What was the driving idea behind it? What was the kind of the driving motive? Was it this warding off evil stuff, or was it about creating community? Was it about grounding? Was it about, And the last thing is, I really agree with the whole thing about Evelyn was talking about connecting to the earth. And where you see some of that really powerfully is in the whole food sovereignty movement. So we know that African women are basically the primary agriculture producers of this continent. And slowly by surely, through the kind of colonization of the seed, the Monsantos and the GMOs, guys of this world, are basically taking the right to own seed and to produce seed away from the hands of women. So the food sovereignty movement is kind of reclaiming that in a very powerful way, and that right to connect to that kind of very deep technical understanding, as well as spiritual understanding of agriculture, of farming, of sustaining healthy fields, making sure your family can eat, and keeping nations alive. And so I think that that's a very interesting area that a lot of working class sisters, rural women are involved in the African continent in terms of defense of life, the defending the right to the seed and defending the right to land.
Wow. It's amazing. Andrea, just bring you in. And I really love that we're on this spiritual tip, because I think very much so with women having the ability to create not only life, but just the way that we create community, family, and sisterhood and intellectual thought and trends and all those things. We are the ultimate creators. And creation is really spirit. It's energy. And so, I guess, Andrea, is this maybe the biggest tool we have in our defense to get what the fuck we're owed and to stop swallowing shit we don't want to? And it really did expletives. It really did.
Yeah, it did. I think the short answer is yes. The longer answer is, how do we get there? How do we get there, and how do we get there with as many of us as possible? Wow. Which is the other thing, because you can do all the spirit work you want and you can be as advanced as you want, but if you don't have a community to exist in and you can't share that with other people, then it's kind of hollow. And it's not as meaningful. There's so much that they just said that I'm going to try to quickly just touch on. First of all, if I could get my shit together, another explicative, I would really do some PhD research on the Western African practice of traditional African religions, because in that, what a lot of us forget is we're born in the West. Yes. So you practice it as a Westerner. Yeah. There are things that you do that are kind of, it's nature. It's what you learned how to do. And we all suffer from small bits of being colonized, no matter how progressive you think that you are. And so in that, we do those things, as opposed to what Jess just said, and also what Evelyn said, is learn about your family, learn about your spirit. My journey came because I had a great grandmother who lived to be almost 100. And for everything that you needed to know or wanted to know, she had some little saying. So much so that even after she's gone, many decades, some stuff she says still rings in my head. Go back to the place where your family was. This year we're having a family reunion, and we're actually going to the town in Georgia where all of my, everybody was born. Amazing. And it's those really small things. And if you happen to be a person who's like first generation African, go home. I have friends that I know, they've not gone home, or I haven't been home since I was 13. You have access to all these things in the West. And why haven't you made it a priority to at least reconnect? Yeah. Yes, there could be bad blood with family or all that, but exactly what Jess and Evelyn was saying, it's the land. The first time I ever landed in Ghana and I got off the plane at night, I just couldn't believe I was there. Yeah. And I mean, there were tears in my eyes, because that's not necessarily my ancestral land, but it's African ancestral land. It's human ancestral land. Yeah. And you need that connection. You definitely need that connection. So I think we can get there. I think that it is going to take work. It is going to take, there will be collateral damage.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term.
How about you got a list of people I'd like to throw in there? Like,
some of them may look like us. A lot of them will not look like us. I think
Florida water.
I know.
Again, Evelyn, I didn't hear you.
What'd you say, Evelyn?
You need a dozen of Florida water and some rum. That I said.
But I think we can't wait to be given permission. Mm-hmm. We have to make it a priority for ourselves. We have to organize. We have to do the work within ourselves, but also within our families and our communities, and then just move forward. And one of the things, you and I were having that conversation this week, I said, anytime I have anything to do, and I know it's a very long journey, and I know it's something that's going to take a lot of work, I never look at the destination. I never do, because it's going to be too much work. I'll be like, I don't want to do it, or I'll never accomplish it. So what I try to do is just take small little steps, every little steps, and celebrate whatever kind of progress that I can make, kind of what Jess was saying, sometimes you can't, some stuff you have to back away from because it is toxic and it is draining, and say, no, I'm not gonna go that way, so let me go this way. And just set very small personal goals that you can achieve, that are important to you, that'll make a difference from you. And then work to find people who are like-minded. And sometimes like-minded people will be the strangest allies.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? It's something about what you said about toxicity. And I need to de-traumatize my Facebook interactions, because sometimes they can be a little to the floor. And this whole brainchild of the things women swallow came from a 600 plus Facebook discussion sparked by Beyonce's dad and colorism. That's actually what sparked this whole thing for me. And when I think about the things I've created in my life, they've often come from places of pain, trauma, and things like that. And I know maybe sometimes people observing me may think, oh, you know, like, I wouldn't do that because it's too draining. And it's not that I thrive off it. That's not the right word, but I certainly know how to transmute that energy into something that can shift my consciousness and then shift where I am with it. Because I'm a very reflective person. I'm constantly questioning myself, sometimes to the fault, which is not helpful, but I'm always looking for a better way. And so I guess I know things are hard. I know things can be toxic, but I guess I'm not scared of toxic, because I feel like I can just sprinkle my stuff on it and it's like, you know, you either implode or I will be better. And that's what I've seen. I mean, I don't want any more traumatic experiences. I mean, how does it work for you guys? How do you approach, because this is another thing, we are going to have toxic interactions. The systems we live in demand it of us, unfortunately, because of the vessels we carry our spirits in. So I guess, you know, just over to you, how do you manage this? We can see the shit coming. So what, are you dodging? Are you hitting it? Are you going through it? Are you going over it? Are you going around it? What can we do? What techniques do you have?
I mean, I think the thing, as you live, as you age, you learn how to handle yourself. So I think I'm better now at picking my battles, because I do think that not every battle has to be fought. And so you just have to work out something basically just like so minor that it will take a lot of energy but drain me. There are some things that need to be challenged head on. But I think in all cases, what you need, like in any struggle, is you need backup. So don't ever feel like you're going to go or you are going into something alone. If you're fighting structural racism, structural sexism, you know, if you're fighting structural, you know, kind of anti-Africanism, whatever it is that you're dealing with, that's a system of power, which means that there are many, many people affected by it, but there are also many people resisting it. So, I mean, as I said, I situate myself in a movement because I just know, like, I'm a part of it, you know, and it's like what I do is really also fueled by what other sisters have done and I do. And so if you ever need backup or support, also call for it. I think it's very interesting to see what happens when you draw a line, because when you draw a line, it's basically a space of potential, but also a space of danger. So for example, interactions in Ghana, Ghanaian, I was a bit shocked because I travel a lot. I mean, a lot. 52 countries, I think, so far, but about 15 in Africa. Ghana is a deeply patriarchal, and Ghanaian men are not used to being challenged at all. And so it's also been very interesting to see how quickly they flip, because actually when they're challenged, they become enraged very quickly. But I'm in the business of challenging these days because I actually just think some things are inappropriate. Yeah. So, you know, like you're on an airplane and a guy comes up and he like touches your hand, and I just will push my hand off and say, excuse me, why are you touching me? And again, it's a space of danger, but also potential, because oftentimes they'll shout their mouth or whatever, but then they'll walk away. Yeah. And you've basically drawn a line saying that is not acceptable. Yeah. And so I feel like sometimes you also have to be a bit brave and just sort of feel that in your heart, what you know you're doing is right. You know, I think it's harder than for younger sisters, because for younger sisters, you still have a lot of that fear around, you know, challenging norms. Will some people protect you? And like I said, systems of power are violent by definition. And so it's almost like violence is always a potential response, you know? And so it's, I think with anything, it's like, you know, you kind of have to prepare yourself for that. But I think the last thing is just to know that also all these battles have been fought repeatedly before. So like, even for example, when you're talking about colorism or something like that, that battle has been fought repeatedly before. And so in a way, it's almost like we're enabled to have the conversation because people have already stood up and been like, look, this is just absolute, you know, colonized, classist, problematic nonsense. You know, and so it's almost like we're emboldened to speak or to challenge because people have already put forward, have already fought, have already stood up, have already critiqued. And I think we have to keep embracing that fact that it's not just me, it's us. We don't agree.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that's powerful. No, I'm just sort of processing everything you're saying to me, especially with the we. I think just personally, sometimes I probably don't call the we enough, and I, you know, try and take them all on. And I think that's probably a South London thing as well. But, you know, we are who we are, and we express ourselves in our environments and stuff like that. But you're right about this thing, but I don't know. Sometimes I feel relying on movements can be problematic. I'm against the leadership model because we've seen what happens to leaders. They get picked off. And I also feel that it makes us lazy. We then don't do the work because we look to someone else who's going to put their lives on the line. They're going to orate for us in such a grand fashion and inspire us. And then we're going to go home and feel good because we heard them speak and to say, I was there, and to put it on our Facebook. Like, really, come on. That's not activism. You know what I mean? So I'm very weary of the leadership model. And I'm also weary about how I place myself in movements as well, because sometimes those who rise to the top haven't done the work and also are maybe too wounded to lead.
Not normally. And just a quick one on that. I mean, so for me, I'm absolutely against the celebrity kind of nonsense around activism. I just think it's maybe serves a PR function, but I think we have to keep it real by acknowledging, you know, I work with the foot soldiers. And so for me, I'm always frustrated by the fact that, like, in African feminism, for example, the foot soldiers, we should know their names. Those organizations too, collectivities, people who've created spaces, groups, initiatives, incredible ideas, completely transformative stuff. We don't know their names. You know, a handful of individuals who are kind of famous on social media or famous because of some PR mechanism, and that's what we associate. So for me, that's not movement. Movement is us and our collective power. And it's not about a leader or something. So if I call myself an African feminist, it's because I'm situating myself within a lineage of political protest. And so I'm just saying, like, and because my feminism has been developed in collective spaces, so it's like we discuss, we debate, we think about it, you listen to people, you know, and then you keep shaping your politics. And so the politics I carry is not mine, you know, as me only. It comes from spaces where we've battled and agreed things. People have changed my mind, you know, made me see new things. And so because of that, that's what I mean, where I get the sense of collective power from it, because I'm like, but I know we've discussed this and we have decided, you know, that this one is no longer, you know, and that also, should I have an experience that is problematic, violent, abusive, whatever, I can then go back to those sisters and be like, you know what, this thing happened. They'll be like, hey,
let's do it. Let's deal with this.
Exactly. And they'll be there for you. And so that's, like, think what I mean about the collective, rather than just thinking of it as me fighting alone.
Yeah. Andrea, Evelyn, please come in. Tell us your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think for me, you know, I've had to give myself some new rules of engagement because I'm highly sensitive. And I'm also a fire sign, and I have an Aquarius mood. So I can flick off and detach at the same time. It's an amazing thing. But one of the things I really had to do for myself to reclaim my mind, talk about reclaiming time, I had to reclaim my mind, is I'm like, I'm going to do this whole logarithm-free life. Because between Facebook and the Twitter and the Instagram, they are powerful, they are helpful, they are useful, yes. But they're also fucking with our minds. They're fucking with our heads. They're shifting our perception. You know, there is a mainstream narrative agenda that's also at play. And that if you support this mainstream narrative agenda, whether you are pro the foolery or you are the tension of providing the tension for the story, that is what gets amplified. So you see the transgressions and you see the people fighting the transgressions over and over, battling. And I don't know if anyone has ever had their mind changed by the social media comment section, right? And I saw that 600 post. I logged in to do, because I'm in Chiang Mai, so everyone uses Facebook for everything. And, I was already salty. I wasn't at Trinidad Carnival and I was in trauma and shock. And I scroll through and I see this thing. I saw it was like 300, then it went to 400, then it went to 600. I clicked in one thing. I saw there was a whole stream and I said, not today, Satan. I rebuke it all. I rebuke it. I have to pour holy water on my timeline because there's so much that gets lost in communicating. And so you can't read energy. You can't read voice. You can't pick up intention. You can't feel anything. And so now everyone is just yelling, trying to get their point across like a broken damn record. So for me, I don't do any more of the social media battles. I don't sharecrop my brilliance on social media anymore, because the other thing that happens is that people may not engage with you, but they watching you from the side, ready to pick up whatever seeds that you're dropping to go germinate their own, platforms for celebridom, right? To build themselves up and not doing any of the work on the back end. And then, I don't fight with white people anymore. I just don't do it. I don't talk to you about your white supremacy. I don't talk to you about your racism.
I stopped that a long time ago, very long time ago.
Very long time. And
8 years, so 8 to 10 years ago, I stopped. That's why I formed the group, because I was like, oh, I'm not having these conversations anywhere else.
Right. And so for me, being someone who worked in community, like domestic community development, and it still being in Black and brown communities in the US, housing and community development, at the matter of fact, being one of the only brown faces, women faces, young faces in pseudo leadership positions at the table, the level of fuckery and foolery was insane. And organizations are literally getting multi-millions of dollars to implement these programs, and they have no metrics. They don't have the right people at the table. Same thing that goes on in international development, right? And at some point I realized, in order to have some peace and sanity, I have to get clear about what I'm put on this earth to do and what my calling is, and go do that. Mm-hmm. And know that I have to release this need of trying to save the world, because that's not going to happen. That's just, that's not going to happen. But what I can do, if I can help plant a seed within someone who then plants a seed within someone else, the butterfly effect, right? Then I've done my work and I've done my job. I pick and choose my battles. Sometimes, particularly traveling in Southeast Asia is interesting, because a lot of the Western stepchildren come over here, to get their Thai girlfriends and do whatever else they're doing. And, they want to be experts about Western white life in America, and they haven't been in the States for 10 years. Mm. And they want to give these poor history lessons. And, Thai people are like, oh, wow, the Westerners teaching us about America or about the UK or whatever. And the most egregious type of history lesson, right? And so sometimes I'll come in, I'll slide in, because you taking up all the space in the room, being loud. So the conversation is open as far as I'm concerned. And I'll just drop a little hint and then I'll slide back out. So I try to engage in a way that can shift things and shut things down. Mm. But I'm also very wary of how I use my time and my energy. And I really, particularly these days, I'm like speaking to the people who want to do the work. And I'm very much also about, there are people who are white or whatever who so-called want to be allies. Okay, and if you're open and you want to interrogate your white supremacy, that's great. Here's some tools, here's some links. Here are some of your white brothers and sisters who are also doing the work. Y'all go do it all together in community, and then go snatch your people up by the nape of the neck. And once we got a good, working group, then we can come together with people who have done a little bit of their healing, their trauma work. But I'm not going to be in spiritual space or community with you, and you're deep in your wounds, and then I'm deep in my wounds, because nothing is going to get done. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of it really is about, you got to know who you are, and you have to know what energizes you and what drains you. And it's okay to back away from conversations if you yourself cannot lend anything useful to the conversation. Because if you're going to just be projecting your own shit onto a situation, it's going to inflame it. Nothing's going to get done. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I stand. And I think a lot of us, because, and I always say, what we think we're mad about, we're not really mad about. There's something else going on that gets to come out in this particular way. Yeah, that doesn't help our conversations and our narratives either. Mm-hmm. That, and so everyone taking responsibility. So you got to figure out, what triggers you, what sends you to the dark place, what sends you to the shadow, the abyss, you know, toyland, whatever it is, and figure out what brings you back up. And yeah.
I hear you. Andrea, over to you. I mean, how do you dodge the shit or not? Or do you go through it?
It kind of depends on what day I wake up, what's going on. But being a person of African descent, born here, having, you know, relatives as far as I can track them were here, but of course they all came from different places in Africa. But my relatives being from the South was such a good, and me being born in the North here in the US was such a good exercise growing up, because, you know, supposedly the North is a little bit more progressive, covertly. And then, you know, things are different in the South. So I would go there every summer so I would see it and I understood it. And I rarely talk to white people about white supremacy. And I've been like that my entire life, because basically, y'all know there is nothing to talk about. Now, when you're ready to do some work, then we can have a conversation. But I don't engage in it. I think Evelyn is right. You have to pick your battles. So for me, what I try to do is create a bubble. And when I know I'm going into a place that is toxic, I do what I have to do to arm myself and to put that bubble up. And then I move through it sometimes. Sometimes I don't go in it. As far as social media, I mean, I put up something about this, and I think that's the first thing I put up on Facebook in like 4 months, 3-4 months, because I find it so problematic. And the passionate sort of, we're going to do this, you know, the passionate emotional side of Black people just comes out, and it's just, some of it is just a waste of energy.
Man.
And nothing is accomplished at the end of the day, other than you've gotten yourself all riled up and you're foaming at the mouth.
Your chest is tight.
And then people,
wait just to the side.
Exactly. And Simone, we've had these conversations, and all people are thinking about is how many likes did I get? What the fuck? Like, we're talking about people's lives. We're talking about change. We're talking about community. And it is just such a bizarro world reality that I very rarely trudge into it, because I don't know who y'all are. I don't know if y'all like y'all. I don't know if I was in a fight if I would ask you for backup. So why am I even engaging with you? Yeah. But I do believe that there is power. We just have to learn how to use it. And you know what? The other thing too, and I was saying this to somebody, is that not only is a revolution not televised, a revolution is not talked about. That's how it's a revolution.
Excuse me, but can I just get a ashe? I mean, sometimes I'm like, my people.
Never happened in the comments section.
My people, I'm like, why are you telling everyone our secret?
I know.
You telling them on the corner where to meet. You think them's not gonna be there with the rubber bullets? They know where you at. You put the GPS location in the freaking update.
Exactly.
And let me say this too, from a spiritual perspective. This might sound a little weird, but when you are arguing with people on Facebook, you actually might be arguing with a demon. There are such things as spirit attachments, energy attachments. There are troublesome souls. The veil is really thin. There are so many troublesome souls attaching themselves to people that it's coming through whatever method is able to come through. And so part of these things, people laugh at me when I say this, but I'm like, Facebook is a portal. It is a portal to stuff. And if you are not mindful, you will get sucked down into the hole. And here's, you know, the US election was thrown by Russian bots and Cambridge Analytics and all of this type of stuff. I'm not saying don't use these tools. I'm saying when you are investing all of your time and your energy into having conversations that are going nowhere, ask yourself if you're talking to a real live human being. You know, if you know that, you better call them up. Like, are you today? In your body? Is your soul attached to your corporal being today?
Yeah.
And I'm joking, but I'm not joking. And stop telling everyone the secrets. Everyone can't come to Wakanda.
No, of course not.
The fact that
my list is lengthy.
People are already inviting people to Wakanda. No
one is coming. Listen,
you have to get your papers sorted.
There's not a lot of space. That's all I'm saying.
You need to go to immigration and get your visa for Wakanda. We need to,
you need a visa application interview.
Right? Are we gonna give you the paper?
Because a lot of people's status would get revoked.
Listen, no one can even come. Like, I'm serious. Like, no.
But I love us all.
Wakanda or the land of possible has to not have all this fuck shit that we deal with every day.
No. It and you know what? It's such a distraction.
Yeah.
It is such a distraction. And because it is a distraction, you have to be strategic about it. And sometimes you just have to walk away from it. I mean, my life has been so zen the last 3 or 4 months because I really haven't been paying attention.
But I don't want to lose the point, though, that out of that ridiculousness that was that thread, that this, which I think is a really beautiful thing, has come about. Out of not feeling very possible, a bad breakup came the beauty of I'm possible. Out of there's been so many things that I don't want us to lose sight of that, because I think there are ways we can transmute things. I'm not saying we should get into Facebook battles, but I'm just saying that there is a power we have to literally flip that stuff into something else. And it goes back to what you said, Evelyn, about your Aquarius moon, that you get enraged but then you disconnect. Like, it's a kind of simultaneous thing. And it's kind of, that's what is happening, that you see something that's full of shit and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to do this 4-week series of us talking about the stuff of these crazy people and how we heal ourselves and how we live through that. And I know there's going to be people watching that are going to be like, yes, okay, I didn't think of that. And so there's the seeds, you know what I mean? I just don't want to lose that part of it, because I think we do that, actually. I think we do that, but maybe not.
But it's interesting. I mean, I was living in a very closed, repressive society. And so just for some reason, I kept dreaming of being able to play capoeira. So I went in search of a capoeirista and I started to learn. But what I found really beautiful about capoeira philosophy is there's a few things. One is that you play with what they call corpo fechado. So it's like your body is closed. So, you play, but and I mean, some people even wear amulets and different things, but you have to practice this thing of like closing your body so that you're basically closing your spirit so you're not harmed by the thing you're fighting. But the second thing is that it's all about play, right? It's basically, it's a martial art that's based on trickster energy.
Yeah.
And so it's like you can outwit your detractor, right? You can outwit the person who's trying to hurt you. And so I feel like it's that thing. It's that capoeira. It's like that ninja, it's like, and so it's a similar thing, but it just means though that you have to be very, very attentive to what you're doing. And again, that corpo fechado idea. So it's like when you go in, because that's the thing, like our hearts are wide open. I mean, I've certainly inherited a wide open heart from my mother and her mother and their mothers and their mothers. Our hearts are wide open, which is why we're able to receive, receive so much, spiritually and all of that. So that's and in fact, I was talking to a Grenadian sister who is a Reiki master, and she was like, yeah, man, she's like, Black people, for us, it's always the crown, the heart, and the root. It's like, she's like, when I work on white people, their crowns are completely closed. But for Black people, our crowns are wide open, our hearts are wide open, and our root is just always searching for grounding. And I found that very interesting. So I think it's just that thing of like, you just have to just learn how to, your force fields, your protections, learn how to put them up on guard so that you can engage in whatever context. But again, also this trickster idea. So it's like, you're not being played, you're the one playing, right? So it's like, and you have to just kind of stay on your feet. Yeah. And just kind of move, swing, dance, trickster. Yeah. And I think with that, you can outsmart people, but you have to be very, you have to be paying attention.
Yeah.
And the other thing around that too is, even when you're engaging with people, so when I teach classes for the government, strangely enough, one of the, government employees are stressed the hell out. They just, on the edge of the edge. And one of the things I teach them is, to ask 2 questions. What what's really going on here, and who am I speaking to? Am I speaking to the person or their conditioning? Am I speaking to you, the person, or am I speaking to your conditioning? And I ask that of most of everyone that I communicate now, and it really does save a lot of frustration. Like, oh, okay, I'm speaking to, you're crazy. I'm speaking to that belief that, you can't trust nobody. So this conversation can't go any further.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I was going to say, based on kind of what Jess was saying, is that not only is it about sort of staying on your feet, but kind of to what you were saying, Simone, you kind of have to pick. You have to pick and choose what are the things that sort of you can transmute, because some things you can't. Some poison is too poisonous. Some poisonous will kind of take you down and have you out for a while. And other poisons you can ingest and you can transmute that. And with age and with practice, you just get better at knowing it, and also kind of knowing yourself. And the other thing too, based on what Evelyn was just saying, is that you really have to be self-aware. Our best tool in all of this is to really know ourselves. So when something is a trigger for you, or you see something on Facebook, you really need to ask your own self, okay, why is this bothering me? What is it about this? Yeah. And like I've really, even with my own self in the last decade, when anything goes on, I really try to get to the root of it, not what's on the surface, because usually that's not what it is. Even like what Evelyn was saying, that's not what we're angry about. I mean, so much of what goes on, at least in the US, is Black people are mad about slavery. I mean, just
quite rightly.
they're mad about it, and they're mad about the disenfranchisement, and they're mad about the lack of access, and they're mad about white supremacy. I mean, some of it is so basic and sort of visceral to who we are in this society. And I suspect worldwide is what are the issues for Black people. And when you take that with Black women, there's so much. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure I said is that when we are silent, it's deadly.
Yeah.
We have to speak. We have to talk about. We have to, as Jess was saying with the man, no, don't touch me. We have to. It's kind of like that whole the no-mo thing. You have to speak things into existence, because if you don't, then you ingest that poison. And that's why we have the highest incidence of heart disease. We have the highest incidence of breast cancer, all these things, because we aren't at least speaking what our truths are. And it doesn't mean that speaking it is going to make everything all right, but at least you have a sense of you're standing in your power, and you're saying, this is who I am, and this is what I know at this moment.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think speaking is what I do. It's what my school reports always said I did. And I've actually made a little bit of a living out of speaking and speaking to people who are like me and can get some kind of sense out of what I'm saying. But this has been an amazing conversation. And I'm actually a little bit slow, because I'm actually just taking in everything you guys have been saying. And, the reason why I asked you guys here, because you've all said stuff to me over the years that's really shifted me, and I've really enjoyed to hear. And so I wanted to share that with everybody on this platform. So I'm just a little bit slow at the moment, because I'm like, oh yeah, that bit. Oh yeah. But it's been amazing. Is there any sort of last words you can each give us? Just something to send our wonderful Black global sisters into the world with some light in their heart and the armor that they need to just keep being them. Anything you can say?
I'll start. In order for us to get better, we must be willing to let go of the things that are not working for us. And it is very scary, because it is the unknown, but the unknown is not negative. It is just our future, which is connected to our past.
It's amazing. That's great. I'm slowing down again just to take that. God, am I going to fasten up? I don't know. But Evelyn, what can you leave with us?
Because I'm from New York, even though this is a down south thing. So I like to say to thine own self, keep it trill. Keep it trill with yourself at all times, because that's how you get to your truth and your healing. Absolutely. And the other thing is the concept of being equally yoked is more than a biblical principle. It is an energetic principle.
Shay.
Yoke yourself to energy that is on your wavelength.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And Jess, what can you leave us with?
Well, there was a beautiful one-liner that Sonia Sanchez wrote in a book of poetry once that she signed for me that said, "Walk in beauty." But also, I think just like live in love, you know, love is a revolution in its deepest sense. So, you know, we are surrounded by hatreds, but if you really engage with things that are beautiful for you and your community and the love that exists, and you kind of feed into that, you know, like Evelyn is saying, be on the wavelength of the things that you need, you know, and where you're at and what you need. Walk in beauty and live in love.
I love that. Yeah. I feel equally yoked by you all. I really do. Honestly, I'm actually just going to go and sit down for a minute because I'm like, oh, this was too much goodness. I'm not even joking. I feel quite lightheaded, and I really ingest what's going on right now. But thank you. My eyes have even gone a little, you know. But thank you. My spirit is really happy, and I'm so grateful that you guys joined us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. This is amazing. We did it from all over the world, and I hope they're feeling better, walking taller, feeling more peaceful than they ever have. So again, thank you. Thank you, guys. Next week is the last week of this series. We're bringing the guys back again. We've got to get them back. We didn't even scratch the surface last week, if you see. But we're bringing them back, and we're gonna talk the things. We're gonna talk the things because they said I want to talk in the things. So that's what we're gonna do. But I do. And thank you, Jess, Evelyn, Andrea. Thank you for your time. And I'm going to say bye. See you.
Bye. Forever.
Bye.